do not subscribe to this YouTube channel. Only subscribe if you get more than halfway through this video. And then maybe if you kind of like me and you're like, oh, I kind of like this random bald black guy, whoever this Creed dude is, I'll subscribe to him. I'll support a brother. Only subscribe if you get a little bit through the video. At least gauge to see if you even like me. But I'm going to try to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to listen and react to Jordan Peterson's speech on We Who Wrestle with God. The video is titled The Sins of Adam and the True Nature of Eve. Today, I'm just going to be a student. I'm not really here to critique him really hard. There's a lot of people trying to critique this man. I'm going to be a student today and listen. Maybe I can learn something. Learn something I never knew. Let's give it a shot.
Good evening and welcome to Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's We Who Wrestle with God Tour.
And so away we go. I'm very much looking forward to this. So the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about stories and set the stage. I think we're at a crucial inflection point in the world, culturally and philosophically. I think we're on the dawn of a new set of realizations. A new set of realizations that will return us to our fundamentals. I think the reason that we have a culture war raging in the West, why there's so much instability, is because something new is struggling to be born or reborn. And I want to explain the reason for that first. And the reason is that the Enlightenment view of the world, which has guided our technological and scientific endeavor, our conceptual endeavor, our philosophical endeavor for a few hundred years, there's something about it that's wrong, like deeply wrong. And that error is making itself manifest in the scientific community, because I would say now that scientists themselves from a multitude of different disciplines understand that the idea that we see the world as a place of facts, or that we see the world as rational creatures, or that you can even see the world that way, is wrong. Wrong, and I believe that it's been demonstrated to be wrong. This isn't a matter of mere philosophical opinion anymore, although it's also that. One example, for example, is that the newest artificial intelligence systems that we've designed, the large language models that have burst onto the stage in the last year or thereabouts, ChatGPT, the catastrophic Gemini that Google so foolishly launched, Elon Musk's Grok, these systems are trained like human beings are trained. They have an aim, they have a purpose. They were trained with reward and punishment, so to speak. They're approximations to a target. They see the world through a structure of value that they have absorbed from human beings. To make the world's smartest linguistic machines, we had to inculcate in them a structure of value. Okay, and so, and we produced machines now that can engage in discourse, that can use language in a way that's virtually indistinguishable from the human, and that's going to become radically indistinguishable from the human very, very rapidly. And they're not programmed like lists of rules. They're not programmed like ordinary thinking machines. They're programmed the same way that human beings learn. They're programmed with aim. They have an ethos and an ethic. We can't orient ourselves in the world with the facts. We can't follow the science because science isn't a leader. Science doesn't establish our aims. Our aims are established using mechanisms of perception and emotion and thought that aren't in themselves scientific. We're aiming at something. Why can't we orient ourselves in the world with the facts? Well, the simplest explanation for that is that there are too many facts. There's as many facts as there are phenomena. More, actually, there's as many facts as there are possible combinations of phenomena. You drown in the facts. When you're confused in your own life and things are chaotic and you're anxious, it's because a plethora of possibilities is making itself manifest in front of you, and you don't know which way to turn. You don't have a clear direction. You don't have a clear aim. There's no way of simplifying the world so that you can act in it. We know, for example, that to perceive the world, you have to obliterate from your consciousness almost everything that you could see, because otherwise you're overwhelmed. We know even that the hallucinogens who are being studied with increasing intensity in recent years interfere with your normal perception such that they bring to consciousness a plethora of things that under normal circumstances you ignore. And the consequence of that is influx of a sense of overwhelming significance and meaning, but at the same time a kind of paralysis of action, because when everything becomes infinitely meaningful, there's no straightforward way of moving forward. When you're in a restaurant with someone on a first date and you're focusing on the conversation and actions of your date in a sea of competing conversations, you zero out everything that you could be attending to in every other table, all the competing thoughts in your imagination, all of the things you could be bringing to mind, to zero in with like laser pinpoint accuracy on what it is that your partner in conversation is doing. And you do that in the world all the time. You make one thing at a time of pinnacle importance, and you arrange everything else in the world at every moment that you perceive around that thing that you've made of pinnacle importance. That's how you see the world. And I don't mean think about the world. This is under thought. It's more profound. It's what you do when you actually see.
Man, keep this less than 30 seconds. This guy, the way he speaks, he is so deep that obviously right now he's not clarifying exactly what he's talking about, but I can just tell he's preparing to say something that's probably a deeper thing. And unless you're really paying attention, you're probably not going to catch what this guy's saying, because I know a lot of people who have read his books, and I've even read some of his books, or one of his books, and his thoughts are just so deep that you unless you're really paying attention and reading between the lines, you're not going to get what he's saying. I wonder where he's headed with this.
If I decide to do something straightforward, like walk from here to the stairs on the stage, and I set my aim, I don't perceive any of you in consequence, because the fact of your existence is irrelevant to my purpose, and you're gone. None of the facts of the stage that I could attend to are relevant and perceptible anymore, except insofar as they're pathways or facilitators or obstacles to my journey forward. If I'm looking to the stairs, I see the chairs, but not as places to sit. I see them as obstacles that I have to circumvent in order to attain my aim. Everything that you see in the world makes itself manifest in accordance with your aim. And that's a radically, revolutionarily different way of conceptualizing the world than the notion that you take the facts and you sort them despite their infinite number and calculate your way with the facts rationally forward. That's not what you do. All right.
Trying to follow him.
Here's a proposition to contemplate. It's another proposition that has revolutionary significance. It'll explain all sorts of things that you know to be true, but don't know why they're true. The description of the structure through which you see the world is a story. Okay, that's what a story is. Okay, so now this explains many things that are otherwise left as mysteries or side effects. I read a book by Steven Pinker once. Pinker's an Enlightenment rationalist from Harvard, and a good guy and very smart, and much of what he says is extraordinarily useful, but he believes, for example, that our proclivity to enjoy and tell stories is like a side effect of something more fundamental cognitively. It's the story as entertainment theory. You go to a movie because it's fun. You read a book of fiction to your child because it's fun. It's not core to the, what would you say? It's not a core element of the way that you exist in the world. It's mere entertainment. It misses the point, that theory. Why is it entertaining? Why can you teach children with stories? If you get the story right for a child, you can capture the child's interest and you can integrate almost any form of learning into the story. And the child will be captivated by that. When children play, pretend play, which they do spontaneously, they spontaneously dramatize the world. They spontaneously make stories out of their roles and their destinies. And that captures them. That forms the basis of their friendships. That's why children want to play so frenetically, is that they're practicing modeling the world. When you go see a movie, it's not that you want to be entertained, although it is entertaining. That's not why you're there. It's not for fun either. That's easy to understand and to see. What's fun about a horror movie? I'm dead serious. It's like, people will be so afraid in a horror movie that they'll cover their eyes. They'll hide behind the chair in front of them. They'll ask themselves afterwards why they even put themselves through it. And yet they'll line up and pay to do it. Well, why would you line up and pay to torture yourself? Well, because you want to know how to deal with what's horrifying. And you want to practice that in a way, if you can, that isn't in itself fatal. You want to expose yourself to the catastrophes of existence so that you're prepared when those catastrophes come along. You want to expose yourself to the predators that lurk everywhere. You want to inure yourself against what's disgusting and contaminating because you're going to have to deal with it. You want to expose yourself to what's frightening so that you can find the courage within you to deal with what's frightening. And that's part of the instinct to develop and expand your competence. And it's in that expansion of competence and skill that occurs as a consequence of that voluntary exposure.
It reminds me of maybe one of the reasons why I like combat sports. It's like you're exposing yourself to danger. Like, why else would you expose yourself to something that you could potentially get sent to the hospital doing? You will inevitably hurt yourself. But I think the exposure to it, you're challenging it and you're overcoming it. And if you're sparring with someone, or another example I could think of is like a lion and its cubs. And they play fight, but when you look at them play fight, they often go for the neck. It's like they're emulating what it's like to actually go hunting, but they're doing it in a playful way, but they're practicing something before they actually do the real thing. I think he's onto something here. We practice doing things before we do it in the real world. Interesting.
That the entertainment is situated. The reason that's entertaining is because it's part of the manner in which you expand yourself. And you can do that in the direction of what's dark and terrible, just as you can in the direction of, say, what's heroic. What do you do when you go to a movie? Well, you fasten onto a character, and you understand that character the same way that you understand people that you're in conversation with. Now, you might think that the way that you understand people is by you listen to what they say and you extract out the knowledge that they're delivering to you in terms of facts, and you interpret the facts and you derive your understanding of the person. Like, none of that's true. That has absolutely nothing to do with how you establish a relationship with someone. And, well, here's some proof. Is that what you do with a dog? Well, obviously not, but you can establish a relationship with a dog. And the relationship you have with a dog, it's not the same as the relationship with a person, but a dog's a pack animal. A dog can become a member of the family. You can understand a dog well enough so the dog likes you. Right, and so whatever you're doing with the dog, it isn't discourse about propositions, because most of the dogs you own don't talk. So, and it's the same with very young children, and it's the same with an infant. You establish a relationship using mechanisms that aren't propositional. They're not rules, they're not descriptions, they're not facts. That's not how you do it. How do you do it? Where do you look when you talk to someone? You look at their eyes. Why? To see where they're pointing them. Why? So you can see what they're looking at. Why? So you can infer what's important to them, because we point our eyes at that which is important to us. That's why our eyes look the way they look. Black in the middle, colored on that ring around that against a white background. That's an evolved mechanism. I can see your eyes. All of our ancestors whose eyes weren't visible either got killed or didn't reproduce. The one thing you want to know about someone right away is where the hell their eyes are pointed. And you can do that politely, which you do by attending to someone without too predatory a stare. You do that by attending politely to their face, but not too intensely, and not attending, let's say, inappropriately to other parts of their body. And they're going to be watching you to see what you do with your eyes. Because the one thing you want to know about someone, above all else, is what the hell are they up to? Right? What's their aim? And so, when you go to a movie, that's what you do. When you watch a character in a role, you see him in a variety of different situations. And you watch how he structures his attention, what he pays attention to, because attention is a costly business. And so people pay attention to what they value. You watch what they attend to, and you watch how they prioritize their actions. And from that, you derive an understanding of what's important to them. As soon as you understand what's important to them, you've got their aim. You've figured that character out. This is what you do when you learn to know someone. What's their aim? As soon as you know their aim, you can see the world through their eyes.
That is very true. You know, working as a bodyguard, I have to be very attentive to what people are looking at, and I have to be able to read their body language very well to see what their intents are and what they're up to. Very true. You could see, in a way, you can see the world through people's eyes.
You can see the same objects they see, and the objects take on the same emotional significance. And when you say, I come to understand someone, what you really mean is, oh, I understand their aim, and now I can aim at the same thing, at least in simulation, at least fictionally, and I can come to inhabit the same world of perception and emotion that they inhabit. I can even guess at how they might act and to what they might attend in situations I haven't seen, because now I know their aim. What's he up to? That's what you're thinking in a murder mystery or in a thriller. What's he up to? What's he up to? What's going to happen next? And so the plot of the fiction is the aim of the character across time, the aim as the character unfolds. And that might involve the transformation of his aims as well, right? And that would be the transformation of a character in a movie. He aims at one thing and he learns that aim is off in some manner, or he comes to a bitter and dismal partial end and has to switch course. And you want to see people transform their aims. That's character development. We see the world through a story. The world's objects reveal themselves in relationship to our aim. The landscape of emotion presents itself as markers on the pathway to our aim. The world reveals itself in accordance with our aim. That's how perception works. That's a hell of a thing to learn. Because if the world, for example, appears to you only as thorn-bearing obstacles, right? If you feel that everything's arrayed against you and there's no pathway forward, if you feel that you're surrounded by foes and obstacles instead of walking the golden pathway, accompanied by allies with the world on your side, you might ask yourself whether or not your aim is wrong.
Man, this guy is so deep. I'm just trying to figure out where is he headed with this. He's like speaking mysteries. Talking about you see the world through a story. And when I hear him say that, it makes me think back when I was younger. What was the story that I believed? How did I see the world? And then the story that I believed, how did that affect me on the outside? And being a young man going to a high school in Arizona, and at one point, you know, I remember a lot of race issues, and seeing the world through that lens and seeing myself as a victim and seeing the world through that lens of that story. I remember how that affected me, but I'm not sure if this is what he's referring to, or maybe he's just speaking about a general thing, or if you're someone who believes in a religion and you see the world through that story, through that lens, and then how that impacts you because of the way you think. I don't know. Let's see where he's going, man. This is very interesting.
And so the world lays itself out in accordance with our aim. We produce fiction, we generate fiction, we live in a fiction landscape because we want to get our aim right. We read stories, we watch movies, we go to plays, we talk to each other because we want to get our aim right. We want to find the place we should go, and we want to learn how to get there efficiently. And we're compelled by spirit and instinct to establish the aim and follow the path, and to transform ourselves so that our aim becomes ever more precise and efficient and delivers us a world that's ever more abundant and beautiful. And that's all a function of aim.
Big tech companies enrich themselves by taking your personal data. They sell every tracked usage. Expected from is your breastfeed comms.
Story. Well, then it's
All right.
okay. So we live in a story. Well, then, as soon as you know that, this is what the postmodernists figured out. By the way, this is why the literary critics have become a dominant force in the culture war. The postmodernists were literary critics. You think, well, there's nothing more irrelevant than a literary critic. Like, who the hell cares what an intellectual thinks about a story? I mean, of all the preposterous things to be concerned about, that might top the list. Not if the story is the thing through which you see the world. If the story is the thing you see through which you see the world, there's nothing more powerful than a literary critic, except perhaps an author. And we wouldn't have a culture war right now if the literary critic wasn't far more powerful than anybody had possibly imagined. Because the French intellectual literary critics, known as the postmodernists, have criticized the central story of the West to death. And that's why we have a culture war.
That's okay. Now we're starting to get to what he's talking about. Holy cow. Dude. Okay, man, I got to go to work soon, but this is very interesting. So he's making the point that stories are used to control people. and he's talking about the Western story, what we believe here, if you live in America, or yeah. What's the story that we believe that is controlling us? Now, I don't want to fill in the blank with whatever he's talking about. I don't want to fill in the blank. I would just want to analyze and continue listening because I don't want to come up with my own assumptions. I need to keep listening to this, though.
And it's no joke. This is foundational. There's no more serious conflict than that. And you all can feel that. That's why you're here. You know that the world is shaking and uncertain in a way that's new. And the reason for that is the story itself is under assault. All right, so let's wander through that a little bit. You see the world through a story. The rationalists or empiricists, even the biologists, they might have an answer to that. They say, okay, fair enough, you see the world through a story, but the story is biologically determined or socioculturally determined. It's a story of sex, that would be Freud, because for Freud and for Charles Darwin, for that matter, for Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, to an equal degree, the story, the aim is sex, reproduction, and the story is predicated on that aim. Freud, Darwin, Dawkins. The degenerate element of that is a descent into a kind of hedonism. Because if sex is the story, then why not worship sex? And some dispute that and say, no, the central story isn't sex. This would be the Marxists. The central story is power. That's the story that the universities tell when they're not telling the story about sex. It's all about power. The essential human aim is domination, oppression, victimization, exploitation. The central theme of the family is a power dynamic. The central theme of the relationship between men and women is a power dynamic. Marriage itself is a heteronormative, patriarchal establishment of oppression that goes back to the dawn of time. The nuclear family is the same thing. Economic arrangements are nothing but power. Friendships are nothing but power. The landscape of human interaction is a dynamic of power, or sex, or both fighting against one another. Look, these are powerful ideas. Yeah. Why? Well, it's obvious. Why? I mean, first of all, without sex, there's no reproduction, and without reproduction, there's no people. And so the Darwinian, Freudian, Richard Dawkins selfish gene claim is that, well, what could it possibly be other than sex? And the Marxists come running forward and say, how about power? And then the Marxists say, well, obviously it's power, because there's radical inequality in the world. There's some who have and some who have not. There's no reason to assume that property in the final analysis, let's say, isn't a form of theft, and everyone who has established themselves in some manner has only done that by stealing from those who are powerless and who have less everything they have and accruing it to themselves. And that's a credible claim for a variety of reasons. The first, most fundamental reason is that a minority of people have all the success on any possible dimension of comparison. It's a very small number of people who are radically attractive. It's a very small number of people who are radically gifted in the visual arts, let's say. It's a radically small percentage of people who are musicians. A tiny percentage of the people have most of the money. A tiny percentage of the people gather most of the attention. It's a Pareto distribution, and that's what Marx pointed onto. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And there's real truth in that, and there's truth in the claim that people structure their relationships with power, and that some people who attain success do it as a consequence of exploitation. And it's equally true that when any human relationship deteriorates, It tends to deteriorate in the relationship of power. If your marriage starts to become shaky, then you begin to exploit each other. Use force. You try to get your way. You try to dominate. It's the same within any family that's deteriorating into a state of pathology. It's the same in any organization. We've seen huge states deteriorate into the tyrannical use of power. If you had to identify a cardinal attribute of mankind, power's a reasonable hypothesis.
I'm going to pause there right there. I'm probably gonna do a part 1, part 2, maybe part 3, however long it takes for me to get through this. But I'm gonna say my thoughts here before I get off. In just response to what I've watched so far. This right here, where he's getting at, I don't think you just casually come to this understanding. Like, this is a guy, I could tell he is really thinking about the world. He's thinking about things that, how did the world come to be? How did America come to the place it is? How did the world, and seeing the world through a story. And what's the story that your country has been told, your nation has been told? What's the history that you've learned when you go to school? You know, what are you learning if you see the world through the lens of just science, purely science? I agree with what he's saying, where you see the world through the lens of just sex and reproduction and survival and power as well. But yeah, it's very intriguing to see where he's going with this, because I know in his book Maps of Meaning, he talks about how, I love how when he speaks about the scriptures and he shows that these stories in the Bible, there's a lot of metaphors and a lot of parables and analogies. And it's like the writers of the Bible are trying to tell a story. And it's amazing how powerful stories are. I read a book about stories and how to tell good stories. And because it was a business book that I read, I think it's called Story Selling. But it really broke down the power of being able to tell good stories to influence people to buy your products and your services. But stories control the world, and it's one of the things that control the world. I don't know. It's amazing to me. It's amazing. I don't want to go too deep and throw out every little thought that comes into my mind, but Jordan Peterson, is he a man that people should listen to? I'm always open to listen to anybody. Pretty much anybody. As long as they're not too crazy, right? And when I see a guy like him who gets attacked by the media, and I always have to go look. Like, well, when someone's getting accused of something or people are backlashing at someone, I always like to dig deeper and see, what are they getting attacked for? Because it reminds me of Christ in a way, where, a guy comes preaching about the kingdom of heaven and speaking about love and forgiveness and all these things, and this man gets crucified, killed, for claiming he's the Son of God and different things. And it's as though many times people that are on the side of good get attacked and persecuted for being on the side of good. And so even if, I don't know, I've seen some of his other interviews, and I could tell he's a man who's really searching for his faith. I mean, he claims to believe in Jesus Christ, believe in God, studies the scriptures and different things. But when people ask him questions like, do you believe in God? It seems like that should be a simple question. We should have a simple answer, yes or no. But I know people, they kind of attack him for not giving a straight answer. But I like his explanation when he says, it's not an easy answer because you don't know. When the person that's asking you that, you have to ask them, what do you mean when you say, do you believe in God? Because if he says yes, then they'll be like, oh, so you believe in genocide. And then they might go into talking about the Crusaders and how supposed Christians went around killing people. And the reason why I say supposed is because these guys, the Crusaders, when I studied some history on the Crusaders, I'm like, that's not biblical, bro. That ain't biblical, bro. And so I don't support that at all. And when you have people say, hey, if you believe in God, if you believe in the scriptures, you have to answer for anything bad that any Christian has ever done throughout history. That's not true. That's a lie. That's a lie. And a guy like Jordan Peterson, who's searching for his own faith, searching for truth, I don't believe he has the answer for the genocide of what has happened throughout all of history in the world of God. And the reason I say that is because I've been there too, where I'm like, you say you believe in God, and then people immediately hop to the conclusion, oh, so you believe in God, so that means you hate homosexuals. It's like, no, it's not. Why did you come to that conclusion? Is it illegal for me to believe in God? Yes or no? So that's why I'm intrigued listening to this guy, because I know what it's like for people to make assumptions about you because you speak your mind. And so, yeah, anyways, I'll probably do a part 2, probably tomorrow. Going to come to a conclusion on this video. Like, hey, let's see what else he has to say. Now, at this point, if you're intrigued by me and you're like, hey, man, I kind of like this black guy with a bald head. He's intriguing to me. I don't agree with everything he says, but he's kind of entertaining. You know what? Let me just hit the subscribe button. Let me throw in a like. And you know what? I made it to the end of the video. I might as well just throw in a comment and tell him, hey, man, I subscribe. Hey, man, here's what I think about Jordan Peterson. Here's what I think about your podcast. All right, y'all. So, hey, look, if you made it to the end, hit that subscribe button, like, help a brother out, man. God bless.